priorities. One of the good things about not passing farm bills every year is it gives Jonathan plenty to talk about and update us on. Jonathan Coppess of the University of Illinois will be discussing the reconciliation farm bill and its implications, the potential consequences of the breakdown in the 50-year Farm Bill Coalition, and what this all means for the future development of farm policy in Illinois and in the Midwest. So please join me in welcoming Jonathan Coppess. Good to see you. That's you. There you go.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Thanks for having me. I guess I'll begin with a little bit of honesty, because I don't really know what to say. Not really sure where to begin. And I kind of feel bad because you're all nice people. We're all friends here. And I don't know that this conversation is going to make anybody's day. So I'll apologize for that. But I do appreciate the chance to talk to you. And shall we say, this is sort of food for thought territory, right? How do we think about policy in a very different policy and political environment? And of course, you may not believe this. I've actually, spent many hours trying to think about how do we approach this, and what do I even say about it? And that seems to get more difficult, frankly, day by day, and every time I turn on the news. And I know there's always a hazard, right? You don't want to connect things that don't need to be connected, but you also don't want to ignore connections that are important, or that may have consequences, or that have things to use, right? Symptoms and pieces of puzzles and so forth. And so like I said, I don't know how to put all this stuff together. And I keep thinking about, we often talk about how food security is national security, and we connect a lot of big picture items. And of course, you cannot have a society that can't feed itself. You cannot defend a society on empty stomachs. And so the food side of this is extraordinarily important. But I've been in these conversations over and over about, and it strikes me, that we live in a situation in which farmers can hardly make a living producing the products for food, and consumers are increasingly struggling to pay for that food. That means somewhere between the farm and the fork is a lot of money sloshing around and going somewhere that is not your pockets and it's not helping consumers. Where does this connect? I don't know. But it drives a lot of frustration, clearly. But it raises a lot of questions about our policies. And in particular, that raises, as we talk about in this little presentation, at a time when our policies seem to be little more than just pumping money to avoid the problems. Making payments over payments on top of payments to bridge to payments. And that is not a functional, effective policy, and I'm worried it's even worse. I'm worried it's a system like painkillers that paper over the problem and do not fix the underlying pain, and you still have that, and we're not fixing it, and it gets worse. So I say all this as sort of an intro, again, maybe part of the caveat and apology to what you're going to go through. But I think we're at a really, really important and critical and difficult point. And I think we can admit to ourselves and to others that the policies we have are not working. And the system we have is broken. And my concern remains that a broken system of policy will break many people in the process, many farmers along the way. And so that's my concern. You just talked about trade. We recognize this outlook, right? We recognize that the international trade situation, the market development work, and everything going on has been damaged substantially. We don't know what the consequences are, but we know, as you just heard, right? Brazil increasingly overtaking us, increasingly consuming the markets that we once relied on at a time when soybeans are the second largest crop in this country and an incredibly large footprint. That's going to challenge everything from markets to acres to your operational issues. So we have to start there. We know that this problem is getting worse. There's China in red, and Brazil, production side. This is not a situation that we are prepared for in policy. I will tell you that straight up. Well, so where are we in policy? Well, here's my hint. I regret to inform you that the Farm Bill is dead. I'm sorry if this comes as shocking news or as unwelcome news to you, and I do not in any way mean this to make light of anything in the Farm Bill space or beyond. And you'll notice there's an asterisk there, which I will come back to. Look, the final fatal blow of this Farm Bill occurred on July 4th of last year when President Trump signed into law the OB3, One Big Beautiful Bill Act, because in it was the Reconciliation Farm Bill. Not a farm bill in its traditional sense, not our committees working through the regular order, debating policy, cutting deals, making compromises, building and strengthening coalitions, and getting the votes on the House and Senate floor that support the legislation. Instead, the Reconciliation Farm Bill tucked $200 billion of cuts in the food assistance program known as SNAP, or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance, the old food stamp program. $200 billion roughly in reductions to the food assistance to low-income households. At the same time, a chunk of that, about $65 to $70 billion of that $200 billion was used to boost farm program payments and crop insurance. That is the end of the Farm Bill. For a long time, the cardinal rule is you don't take from one side of the coalition to pay for the other, and you sure as hell don't take from food assistance to pay for farm payments. They did it in a big way, and then they tucked it into reconciliation to avoid the political realities of trying to pass that in the open political environment and under normal debate. So that's a problem. So I put an asterisk on the Farm Bill because, let's be clear, it doesn't mean these policies are going away. What I'm talking about when I talk about the Farm Bill is basically a 50-year political coalition with near unmatched success in Congress. That coalition between the farm side of it and the food assistance side, as well as conservation. And while that Reconciliation Farm Bill may have been the final part of this, we've seen 3 really close calls and 3 really damaging changes or experiences along the way. 2013 is the first defeat of a farm bill on the House floor since 1962. Hold on to that because I'll come back because I can't help but talk a little bit about history. 2018 is the second straight defeat of a farm bill on the House floor. Both of them fought about SNAP, both of them highly partisan and ugly in all political senses, and the only time this policy has ever suffered 2 consecutive defeats on the House floor. If that was not enough, since 2018, we have poured roughly $148 billion. That's adjusted for inflation by ERS, but think about that number again, $148 billion in ad hoc and supplemental assistance. That's outside the Farm Bill. That is not Farm Bill authorized. That is not budgeted for. That is off the books. Some of it made up in programs the administration created of its own interest and volition. Okay? That is a vast and drastic change in the political situation. That changes the expectations you have. That changes the game in D.C. when lobbyists run to the Hill or to USDA and demand something, because this is an enormous amount of money that Congress can never match when they have to cost it out over 10 years in a Congressional Budget Office score. So these 3 things put it in a position of real difficulty that was finished off in reconciliation. Oops, there we go. Now, again, there's an asterisk on this because, as I said, the ARC and PLC program, the agricultural risk coverage, price loss coverage, direct payment programs are still in existence. They are not done. They are reauthorized through 2031. In the same vein, 4 of the major conservation programs, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, Conservation Stewardship Program, Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and Agriculture Conservation Easement Program, the alphabet soup, have also been reauthorized through 2031. There's one big exception, and one that concerns me drastically as an exception is the Conservation Reserve Program, the backbone conservation program since 1985 that holds about 27 million acres of ground in it right now, has not been reauthorized. It was temporarily extended for 1 more year, but it does not have the 2031 end date and sits in a state of limbo in a Congress, you may have noticed, that has trouble getting things done. So this program is at risk in the nicest sense possible. And of course, we all know crop insurance is permanently authorized, so that's fine. So the farm policies are not at an end, but the Farm Bill as a coalition, as a functional congressional vehicle, I think is done. And that means we have a new reality to deal with in terms of figuring out policies and figuring out what things look like going forward. As I said, I'm a history geek. I will admit that to you if you didn't know that already. 1962 is a key date in the history of foreign policy. So leading into it, after World War II, we had this little thing called a technological revolution in agriculture. Mechanization, chemical fertilizers, chemicals, herbicides, new seed traits, and so forth. This boosted production per acre drastically. One of the problems with the policy at the time was built around the idea that we could tell farmers to plant a certain allotment of acres, and that would control supplies to keep prices high. Well, the problem is, when you're doubling production on those acres, the whole idea of controlling supplies, which didn't work to begin with, really fell apart in the 50s. As that fell apart, the factional fighting within the coalition, particularly between the southern cotton farmers and the Midwest corn farmers, really heated up. And throughout the 1950s, they butted heads and battled over policy, in part because, and keep this in mind as we get later in this presentation, in part because when we used acreage allotments on cotton acres, that took acres away from planted to cotton, which they then turned around and planted to corn, which caused a surplus in the corn market and spread the problems that we were seeing in some parts of the country to the Midwest, where it overtook our ability to feed livestock, which was a key demand of that, obviously, at the time. So this fight got really intense because it seemed like, if you're in the Midwest, that the cotton farmers of the South and their members of Congress were using policy to hurt you. They were using policy to spread the problems, subsidizing corn planting in cotton country that may not have been there before. So the coalition built around those regional commodity interests turned on itself and broke down. And in 1962, a farm bill, which at that time did not include food assistance, was just commodity programs, was defeated on the House floor because the Midwest revolted. The Midwest refused to go along with policy that made this even worse. To top this off, when they finally got something through in 1962, it went to a referendum of wheat farmers, and the wheat farmers rejected that policy. Now, you can do the political math on that. You can't get it through the House, you're fighting each other, and when it goes to farmers for a vote, they rejected it. By all political calculations, farm policy should have been done and over in 1963. That's when food stamps enters. They cut a deal on the House floor in 1964 to move cotton and wheat fixes, or what they thought were fixes, or didn't think were fixes, but were using it conveniently, and they paired that up, and they said, if you vote for this, we'll let off on food stamps, and in 1964, Congress first enacted the Food Stamp Act. So it is no exaggeration to point out that food stamps saved farm policy in 1964. They're then rolled together in 1973, a time of spiking prices and inflation and problems across the economy. Now we bring them together. And farm policy and food stamps married in 1973's Farm Bill. And there they were together for 52 years, nearly. That's the coalition, and that's the history behind it. And so when I say we've upended things, I mean it, and the history's there. So while we're nerding out, since we're on campus, there's a little bit of history. Here's a little bit of political theory. That guy's James Madison. You may have heard of him. He helped write the Constitution of the United States. And what he liked to tell people, and what he wrote very, I think, wonderfully and fascinatingly well in the Federalist Papers, number 51, was he explained that the way this whole thing was designed around a theory of competition. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. That's why coalitions matter, because everything is a factional interest in politics. Everything, you think about us, we're political animals and we play politics in groups. That's what that means. And so he set up a system in which you need 218 votes in one chamber and 50 in the other, but really it's 60 now because of the filibuster. And you don't get those votes by yourself. You get those votes with friends, with allies, with coalitional partners. That's a farm bill. So it fit very well in this model of our system, this political theory from Madison forward about how we do this. Of course, there are a lot of trouble. There's nothing about this is perfect. We all understand that. And the rules of procedure are complex and complicated, and it's a pain in the backside to get stuff through. But when you have a coalition at your back, you got the wind of the sails and you can move. And since 1973, farm bills do not get defeated when that coalition works. That has been done. That is now over. And so now we're in a situation where this fight happens without the allies we had. Or worse, it happens with the allies opposed to us. But I want to be clear, because I'm not pretending that this system worked perfectly, and there are a lot of challenges and problems. We all know that today. We've known this for some time. Because we know that in this whole coalitional battle, sometimes it's a whole lot easier to form some coalitions than others. It's really easy when it's a small, concentrated group that is very similar to each other. Well, we move forward a few decades from that, and we watch budget policy make everything about that coalitional building and that policy process worse. And I promise you I'm not going to spend a lot of time torturing you with budget policy discussion, but I just want you to think about this. If it's hard to clear the double majority that Madison set up in Congress without the votes, it gets harder to do it when everything's built around projected 10-year spending items and everything becomes a budget focus. So you think of the old, if all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. So you hammer the hell out of all these coalitions. And the idea is, we got to focus on spending, focus on spending. But we miss the people that policy is designed to help. We miss the people who vote for people to work on policy. And we miss often what the policy is supposed to do. So then we add more rules. We add something called pay-go, pay as you go. Zero-sum political game. This means for me to get something, you got to lose something. I got to take. This is not favorable to building coalitions. So we have to cut somebody to get something. This also favors existing programs and policies and makes it really hard to make changes, so we stifle innovation in the policy space. And then, of course, for factions. Because the budget's built on spending over 10 years projected into an unknowable future, the smaller you are, the easier it is to get what you want and get more of what you want, because it doesn't cost as much in a baseline score over 10 years. So we allow hostage taking to happen, in a sense. The big interests, the big spending items taken hostage by the smallest to get the maximum benefit they can get out of it. This is what budget policy has added to our challenges in Congress. We know this in a farm bill, because 80% of the spending of a farm bill went to SNAP. And while that is a lot of money, it's also feeding over 40 million people on average every month. In the world's wealthiest nation, this many people every month struggle to put food on the table. But it costs a lot of money to pay them a little bit, right? We know these are low-income households. About $2,680 for a household of 4 is the income requirement a month. The maximum benefit per month is about $298 for one person, or just under $1,000 for 4. That roughly comes out to about $10 a day to eat. We know this in farm policy, right? Fewer than probably 500,000 farmers in this country are receiving direct payments out of ARC and PLC. That's probably an exaggerated number. We know that, and that dwindles every year, and it's going to dwindle even faster because of our policies. We know that the median household farm income is about $98,000 a year, so much higher. And the maximum benefit per individual is $155,000 in payments. And of course, we know that you can get around that very easily. So these are vast differences. This is what makes this policy very difficult, and what happened in the Reconciliation Farm Bill very difficult. But we dig deeper, we still see this problem. Because we also know that in the ARC and PLC programs, in our smaller coalitional universe just amongst farm groups, we know that the largest payments per base acre go to the smallest commodities in the program. Time and time again, we watch peanuts, rice, and cotton, who are located only in southern areas, get massive payments per base acre, but it barely shows in a baseline in which 98 or 94 million base acres of corn or 53.5 million base acres of soybeans looks a hell of a lot bigger, even when the changes are smaller. And of course, we see this pit organizations against each other and cause problems, things we've also seen throughout history. So we know these aspects are a part of our challenge. Now look, budgets are problems, and let us admit that our nation has a debt and deficit problem. But we've been doing this budget policy mess for over 50 years, and I don't think we've gotten anywhere near solving it. So what you see on the screen before you are the top pinkish line are the outlays or spending every year. The green line is the revenue of the federal government every year, and the little bars falling down below are the deficits year by year. So destroying the coalition building efforts and making a mess of the congressional process has not delivered the budget policy outcomes we thought maybe it should have. Maybe you think I'm crazy. There's the debt held by public as a share of GDP. Our budget policies have failed miserably. The only thing they've succeeded in doing is making a mess of the legislative process and policy making. But this is not a discussion about budget policy. So I apologize for interrupting this otherwise dark and depressing commentary with that mess. So where do we go? Where are we peering into the future? I don't know what this looks like going forward. I'm not going to lie to you. But I do know we are approaching maximum absurdity in our policies because we are throwing enormous amounts of money. So the ECAP program was $10 billion in payments in early 2025. We are projecting 13.5. CBO is over $15 billion, and ARC and PLC payments should be made in October. And because that's taking time to get there, because the policy is designed to be delayed by a year, we've now made one bridge payment of $12 billion, and we're probably going to make more. And that is a bridge from one payment to the next. That is a bridge from an ad hoc payment to the ARC and PLC payment with those brand new reference price scores. In case I'm not being clear enough, that's a lot of money. That is an unprecedented amount of spending on farmers in a very short amount of time. It has implications and consequences well beyond the federal baselines and budgets. Okay, the Reconciliation Farm Bill, if you haven't heard me complain about that one yet, well, I think it's made everything worse. I think it's damaged our policy as much as our coalitions and our politics, and I think it's going to hurt farmers. I'm really worried about young farmers, farmers who have maybe been in operation for 20 years or less, farmers who don't have all the base acres and all the backing and all the financial support. I'm really concerned what this looks like for them going forward. But I'm also just beyond frustrated with this imbalance in our policy. So here it is. These are our projections for the 2025 crop year to be paid this coming October for ARC and PLC. We are looking at possibly as much as $300 a base acre in long grain rice. Now that's an understatement because that's an average. There are going to be farms out there that receive more than that on their base acres. And when I tell you that the smallest crops get the largest payments, there it is, there's the base acres. There's about 4.6 million base acres of rice. By the way, they plant half of that every year, so about 2 million of those acres every year get $300 per base acre, possibly, and they're planting a different crop. Guess which crops those are? You can see seed cotton and peanuts in the same realm. Seed cotton's got me really worried because the cotton market has been destroyed more than the soybean market. And so the expense of that crop and the payments, upwards of $130 a base acre, make it real attractive to go find a cheaper crop to grow. Anybody have an idea what cheaper crop that could be? Oh, to make it worse, CBO is telling us that of the 30 million base acres that have added to the programs in the Reconciliation Farm Bill, a whole bunch of them are going to go to cotton, 30% increase for cotton. Corn is going to see a lot of base acres increasing, probably from 94, CBO is estimating 111 million base acres. Soybeans gets a booster as well, about 20%, right? So we're increasing the number of acres in this mix. These base acres, by the way, date to probably the 1990s or even the 1980s, maybe the late 2000s or early 2000s for soybeans, right? So we've not updated this, and a whole lot's changed since that point in time. 1996 is when this policy was first enacted, this decoupled base system. So imagine what has changed since 1996. I've lost a little bit of hair since then. This is getting us bad to worse. That's what the farm payments are going to do, and I want to come back to that a bit, but I just need to make sure we understand the crop insurance issues as well. Because this Reconciliation Farm Bill and the state of farm policy now is problematic and getting more so, largely around a system in the crop insurance that is also unbalanced, imbalanced, and frankly out of whack. Our ratings are not correct. We are seeing way too much paid out in indemnities year over year in certain areas of the country while other areas of the country are paying into a program and not seeing the indemnities, which is what you would expect from insurance, but at some point maybe you get tired of paying for somebody else's losses. Guess where that is? Those are the green areas, in case you're wondering. This is Gary Schnicke's loss ratio map, county by county. Some of these counties are above 2.0 loss ratio in the last 10 years. That means $2 in indemnity for every dollar in premium paid in. And that dollar in premium includes the federal premium subsidy, not just what the farmer pays. So if your subsidy rate is 80%, that means you pay in 20 cents on the dollar and are getting more than $2 out. That's something else. Well, that's the supplemental coverage option, which has been boosted in the Reconciliation Farm Bill to an 80% subsidy with a 90% loss trigger. High losses at a county level, which means we're over-insuring the highest risk parts of the country and paying for it out of the Treasury and out of your pockets. We know that this was designed for high-risk areas in part because they also included a provision that the administrative and operating subsidies to the crop insurance companies now get a booster of 6% of their book value if they continue selling in areas with 120% losses or higher. Think about that for a minute. Try to put that as an analogy to insuring a driver. Your 16-year-old son wrecks the car a lot, but we're going to pay more. We're going to encourage you to keep insuring that. This is not sound insurance. This isn't sound policy on anything, but this is not sound insurance policy that's supposed to be running at an actuarially sound basis, 1.0 loss ratio. This is problematic, folks. The integrity of the program is not looking well in this case. One more map of this. There we go. This is also Gary's work because, listen, let's be honest, I can't do math very well, but Gary can. And we've run what it looks like on the net indemnity payment. So this is the indemnities going out minus what the farmer pays, or the net farmer benefit is another way we think about it. This is the funds out of insurance above what you pay out of your pocket for it. The red area is $20 paid in, more than they get out. The green area is over $100 more from the program than they pay in. So what does that mean? Okay, this is a program that is facing real problems as we go forward. Finally, when I say I'm worried about the future, this one scares me substantially because we have also created a special massive loophole that if you can create multiple LLCs, embed them in another LLC, you get new payment limits for every one of those. So it's very easy, if you're a large enough operation with enough lawyers and accountants, to find ways to millions of dollars of payments through LLC entity structures. And let me be clear. I am not saying that LLCs are bad. I'm not saying that organizing your farm with S-corps and LLCs is a bad idea. In fact, it's probably got a lot of really good reasons to do so. Liability protection and tax consequences being some of those. My dad ran an LLC, operated on a S-corp land ownership, right? I get it. That's not what we're talking about here. You can do that now. There's nothing preventing that. In fact, more and more of you are doing that every year. What we're talking about is a payment limit loophole that allows you to create additional entities to get more payments. And it only matters if you have enough acres, base acres in the program, to where the payment limit is a concern. That's going to take somewhere like 7,500 base acres of soybeans to get close to the payment limit on average payments. That means the largest operations are going to get larger. And they're going to get larger with subsidies sloshing around in these multi-entity accounts, because what else are you going to do with that cash? That cash is going to go to buy land and to bid up cash rents. This is a problem in the long run for farmers, particularly younger farmers. I cannot imagine why this policy was anybody's idea, but it's in there now and it is the law. So watch out when you go bidding against a large LLC. You'll know it. So base acres. This is where we're going to spend a little time. Like I said, base acres were largely put in place in 1996. If you trouble yourself or torture yourself with reading our farmdoc articles, I've been trying to sort this out because this question has really rattled around my half-empty brain for quite some time. What does it mean to get $300 on an acre that you don't have to plant to the crop to get the payment? What does it mean to be switching around and thinking about the management of those acres when you have that extra cash in your pocket. So we know that these things have largely been unchanged since 2002. They could date back to the 1990s. Hell, some of them could date back to the 1980s. Take your pick of anything that has changed since that time, including the renewable fuels standard, which is driving up demand for corn and soybeans. We've seen it help push acreage spreading outside of the Corn Belt. Genetically engineered crops have increased yields and changed what we can grow and where we can grow it. China entered the World Trade Organization in 2000. We may think differently about that decision some days, but there they are now, and we've got an export demand driven, at least up until recently, driven a lot by the Chinese demand for soybeans. Crop insurance in 1996 was a shadow of its current self. And we were not seeing ad hoc payments to any degree since that time. So a lot has changed. Now what concerns me is that because we have jacked up these payments on base acres of seed cotton, rice, and peanuts in particular, we've given incentives to plant those to corn and soybeans, particularly given the RFS demand for corn. And I'm worried we're going to see a whole lot more corn acres and soybean acres planted this spring. And if CBO's right, and they get another 3 or 4 million seed cotton, that's like somewhere between 6 and 7 million acres of seed cotton that will go into corn or soybeans and get $130 an acre from the jump. You are not just competing with neighbors and LLCs, you are competing for markets around the world. Those soybeans are also your competition. So I'm not here just to pick on the South. I know that's the reputation I have managed to gain. Honestly, I'm here to try to defend us, to defend you all, and to let you know that this is a huge concern. This is a warning of what's coming. So if you see 110 million acres of corn planted in the spring, you know that a whole huge chunk of that is on base acres getting 2 and 3 times the amount of money from the federal government. Their profitability is from payments. And our policy is picking winners and losers. And that is a problem. It's a real problem. This is not to pick on the South. This is to raise concerns from the Midwest about what is happening. And to drive us to think about policy differently and to maybe get creative and think about what we need and how we should be looking at these policies. So let's think this through again with tough realities. The Chinese market is now more of a geopolitical pawn than it is a market or trade discussion. Brazil's overtaking us in acres, they're overtaking us in production, they're overtaking exports to China. If you're China, this is a great situation. They would hope for Americans to try to outplant and outproduce Brazil, and Brazil to outproduce and outplant Americans, because what happens? The price goes down, and they buy soybeans cheap. Okay? That's a problem. Corn and the RFS, how much acreage switching into corn to capture a stronger demand for the RFS can the corn market hold? How much does that RFS help absorb? I don't know, but it's a concern we should be thinking about and talking about. And as I said, these ad hoc payments, which are connected to planted acres, which really mess things up, because now you get one on a base acre and one on a planted acre, plus the insurance. If we keep making ad hoc payments at the level we are, I'm concerned we're going to pay farmers to drive right off a cliff. And we know where that leads. Overproduction, underpriced, and underwater. So this set of challenges is growing. Right? Okay. So what do we do? I guess I'm supposed to think about what we do. My first response to you is, I don't really know. I wish I had the policy ideas in my back pocket that we could just hand out and work on. We are working on trying to generate ideas, get creative and innovative here, but I don't know what this looks like. I mean, this is a new set of realities. If we were to think strategically and logically through this, we'd look at this and say, okay, we're in a hole. The first thing we do is we stop digging. That might look something like end unconditional ad hoc and supplemental payments. I'm not saying we have to stop making those payments. In fact, I would sound like a fool, because all the other voices in this industry, and particularly all the ones that play farmer in DC, will be saying the opposite. So maybe what we need are conditions on those ad hoc payments. How do we condition assistance so that it does not feed the problem and does not drive you off a cliff? Maybe that looks like we're not planting certain crops on certain base acres. Maybe that looks like conservation. I don't know. Get creative. But we shouldn't be just handing money out and watching the consequences unfold. Crop insurance integrity. That has to be, in my mind, one of the top issues. It is a fundamental risk management tool. It needs to remain so. It cannot become a direct payment program disguised as insurance. So fixing the ratings is a starting point. Something has to happen that, I am sorry, but if you have 10 years of losses and 10 years of production, your insurance has to be more expensive. I know that's going to tick off some people, but that does not seem like insurance otherwise. So the integrity is there. Something else that may get me in trouble in this room, because I'm speaking to a commodity organization, but if I'm not in trouble yet, what the hell? I think maybe one of their problems is we think about this in a silo by silo, commodity by commodity basis. I always find it fascinating. Every story, every conversation is, oh my God, rice farmers can't make money. Are they only growing rice? Corn farmers can't make money. Are they only growing corn? We've allowed our policy to become this payment for corn, this payment for seed cotton, this payment for rice, and we're not looking at the entire farm situation or thinking about it in a sense of how you manage your operation and tailoring policy to what makes sense on the farm, not what makes sense in DC. So somehow we have to break through that. I don't know what that looks like. But another hint is you need friends and allies. So what does that look like? Get out of the silos. We stop digging. All right. I just did that part. So here is part of what we're putting together, in part with support from you all. So I appreciate this as you help support the policy design lab that we are developing here on campus. And one of the things we're building right now, and please, these are rough draft numbers, but what we're trying to build is what I'm kind of jokingly call the soybean storyboard. How do we walk through all these sort of market issues and compile this together so that when we get to the policy page, we have this kind of built into it and we start thinking about policy from these perspectives. Now, obviously, I just said don't silo in commodities. I'm talking about a soybean storyboard. I get that. But you got to start somewhere. And so working through this, using the data, using our research and our modeling capabilities to try and build policies in a reality-based situation and honestly think about how we don't make it worse. I know that sounds radical, but we don't have policies making the situation worse. We want to test ideas as best we can before we run with them. And we want to see ideas we don't like and butt heads with ourselves and argue and debate and try to come up with a better look for this. So that's one of the things we're trying to do. It's taking us time. I apologize for how slow we are, but we are slow, and these are wonderful challenges to sort out. What does a new policy look like? I think it begins with a risk-based, equitable concept that's connected to reality. That means base acres probably have to go away or be drastically rethought. It also can't be a one-size-fits-all, like one reference price for all soybean acres in the country. How do we fix that? How do we find that right balance between them? I think connected to land and acres is a better way to go than to prices and crops. How do we get out of market distortion challenges? How do we not influence planting decisions when we are looking at those planted acres and we're thinking about acres and production? One of the things I'd love to see policy do is be more flexible, more adaptable itself, but allow farmers themselves to adapt to changes and not be punished by policy, not stifle innovation. And when I say risk management and risk-based, I really think we're missing an opportunity to think about risk beyond yield and price risk, but to think about even the conservation questions for risk. How do we build resiliency? How do we build productive capacity and sustain it for the long term. We talked about Chinese markets and the challenges with Brazil and the degraded pasture land stuff. How do we do a better job of proving that we have the best, most sustainable soybean production in the world? And how do we build risk-based policies around that? So a bigger picture, a more comprehensive concept of risk is one thing. I'd love to see it prioritize early stage farmers. I don't know if that looks like fading out on the policy side or what that looks like. But how do we make sure that the next generation can get started and not be stifled or smothered along the way, particularly when times get tough? I mean, think about this. If you started farming 20 years ago, you've only farmed with the RFS. That's kind of interesting. So let's prioritize these early stage farmers. Let's don't penalize innovators. If we can come up with policies that we think help in that direction, then I think we're better off. And I think we can sell them even without the Farm Bill problems and the coalitional challenges that we've seen. But I don't pretend that this is remotely easy. And I don't know that I can tell you exactly what that design looks like. We certainly want to work on it. And finally, there's real politics, right? What is the reality in politics? We've smashed a coalition or broke it apart. And we did that whether you wanted to do it individually or as a group or not. You are a part of it. $200 billion in SNAP cuts, $200 billion less to feed people in this country, to more than double the payments going out the door, not counting the ad hoc assistance made on top of it and not counting the crop insurance assistance going along with it. This is not a comfortable political situation in any stretch, but it certainly isn't when the population of the country in a self-governing system of representation looks like this. So part of what we have to do is think about coalitions, right? How do you defend your policy to a dance partner? Who can dance with us in the congressional process? What do those coalitions look like? Do we rebuild? Can we build something else? I don't know, but that has to be part of the equation. And we think about this now and how we defend policies in the congressional space without the cover of SNAP, because that's a different conversation. How do we connect between farming and rural communities? I'm increasingly troubled by what has happened for so long in rural communities and the disconnect, not just from farms and big cities, farms in the towns around us. So how do we build those coalitions and help our rural communities thrive and survive? What does that look like when we're more connected? And then also the urban population centers as well. This may mean we have to allocate responsibility for where we are at. This may mean some of our coalitional partners are not the same coalitional partners going forward. I'm not suggesting throwing anybody overboard, but I'm suggesting that everything has to be evaluated in terms of the real politics of the situation. So those are some ideas. Those are some thoughts, some food for thought. But folks, we are where we are. So in the proverbial blues tradition of the crossroads, right? This is where we stand, and where we go from here is really up to us. And that's what matters. And so that, while I understand is not inspirational and not necessarily a positive, optimistic view, but it's cold and it's winter and it's January, so hunker down. But it is now on us. And this is a chance to rethink. And maybe when we've hit a point of maximum absurdity, it's more of an issue and more of a motivation, if you will. There's my shameless plug also. If you like your history, you want to read some boring books while it's cold, there you go. Okay. Thank you for having me out. I don't know if we want to take questions. I'm happy to take questions. DeLoss, are we taking questions? Or should I run away?
Nobody's throwing anything.
Nobody's throwing anything just yet, but I do appreciate you sitting through maybe not the most enjoyable presentation you've ever seen. Yes, sir. Oh, I mean, I'm taking your job.
Well, stay right here. We'll get a microphone that way. So you know that, and we just now know that. Do people in D.C. know that?
I mean, we're trying to inform every aspect of this conversation. But no, this is, I would imagine, part of the job of groups who talk to people in D.C. So I'm not telling you what to say or how to say it, but here's the information. This is what we know. This is how we evaluate it.
All right, over here.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. You're telling the truth. On Sunday, I listened to some of the ag reports, and I heard something interesting out of Iowa. I think I mentioned it to the folks in one of the tables down there. Iowa is looking at a bill called the Iowa Farm Bill. They don't know if they're going to get it passed, but it's like they're throwing out the Fed. The Fed's over here, Iowa will be here, and it's their own farm bill, just for the state of Iowa. And is that an answer for the rest of the Corn Belt? Should Illinois have a farm bill?
That's a really interesting question. I do.
Thank you.
I do wonder that myself sometimes. I think state budgets are a particular challenge, and it's going to be a lot harder to max in any way, shape, or form, or meet or equal in any way, shape, or form what the federal government can spend on it. So I don't know if we could think about the state as a better partner. The other thing I will build off of is this real politic. The Midwest, I think, has to work together and has to stand together in this discussion if you want to see policies change. We know other regions, particularly the South, very good at sticking together and very good at driving the policy discussion from their regional perspective, which you expect them to do. So it may be as much as a Midwestern coalitional effort as it is state by state. But I think all ideas need to be on the table. I just don't want to, I want to be realistic about what the states can afford. Interesting.
Do you have one back here?
This gentleman said it's a sobering, not just an interesting conversation. So,
Sorry, hopefully they're going to feed you some booze later today to help
There we
even
go.
this thing out a little bit.
so with many groups in agriculture trying to vie for agriculture in the rural areas, it's long been one of those things people say, we have a farm bill that goes through because of SNAP, right? That's a common concept. And so SNAP's not all the way gone.
No.
But with my underlying question is, what are all the commodity groups and folks like yourself putting this strategy together when I believe we're down to Charles Grassley as the only farmer in the 535 people that represent rural America, hopefully, and us as farmers and farming community. I'll just say it out in the open. Let's ask the question amongst ourselves how we're going to get more advocates for us when there's not a farmer in there, because he's 93, I think, at the end of tenure in life. So I think that's on us to figure something out.
I think you make a good point, and it is a political reality on what the votes look like and what people understand. I mean, this is where this rebuilding across communities is important, because a whole lot of people do not know anything about farming. We have a huge gap. And like I said at the beginning, I'm struggling with understanding how it is that we can't make money in farming and they can't afford to buy food, and somebody somewhere is doing really well in this system. And what does that look like, and how does that change, and where does that help you build bridges across some of these divides, right? You can't ever explain, like you can't change that dynamic, right? Consumers are not going to spend their time, most of them, knowing everything to know about farming. Maybe you don't even want them to. But how do you build that into relevancy for more people? What does that policy look like? Again, conservation becomes a bridge policy because of that. You're helping the farmer and your water's cleaner, right? These are the kinds of things, rural community needs and so forth. How do you talk to those that are outside of farming, talk to, discuss with, versus just tell them what you think they should know? That's a challenge. So I hear you, it's a big issue, but Congress is designed to be representative. And so you keep that in mind. But I think it's a good point.
In back.
Hey, Jonathan, that was really great. So you talked about historic concerns with set-asides and concerns about maybe intensification issues thereafter. That said, do you think, and you also talked about the need for flexibility, do you think sort of conservation as an angle at controlling acres going forward, do you think that's dead, or do you have thoughts on that issue going forward?
Thank you, Will. Former student, doing well, asking tough questions. It is a tough question. And I am not here to promote set-aside, return to set-aside acres or acreage allotments or the parity system, God forbid. And I don't think conservation has to only be that. But I do think we can be a whole lot more flexible and innovative with conservation. And I mentioned at the beginning the CRP program is sort of at drastic risk. And the last thing we want to see is a whole bunch of acres come out at this point in time because that program's at risk or lost. But it also opens an opportunity. What does a CRP program look like that really works for working lands and for a place like Illinois? Right, we've got continuous acres. We still get a lot of conservation dollars in the state, relatively speaking, from CRP. But what would it look like if it rented your acres for just the cover crop months? What would it look like if it allowed you to put different crops and you could diversify and adjust rental payments based on what you were doing on your field? What would, if it got out of your way to manage your fields and the rental payment responds to that? So those are the kind of things I'm thinking about, more than just setting aside acres or just pulling acres out. Look, I don't think that's, we got a lot of history that policy doesn't work. We got to be more creative about conservation and risk together and working out a policy that I think is more focused on that. But what I like about CRP is its basic, simple design. It's focused on acres, and it pays a rental payment on those acres. With those two pieces, you can do a whole lot around it. And that rental payment can look different. It doesn't have to be 10 years, right? There's a whole lot of stuff there. I still have a strange historical appreciation of the soil bank from 1956, which was an idea that came out of Illinois, by the way. Illinois farmers in 1953 first proposed this when this whole problem with the South started to really unravel over acreage allotments. You said, hey, why don't we put acres in something else? You pushed this all the way up through, and President Eisenhower made it the focal point of his January 9th, 1956 speech on agriculture and the economy. And Congress eventually enacted it, and then the South killed it, but that's a different story.
Over here. Oh, over here, then over here.
Dr. Coppess, lays me your head. You're probably sick and tired of hearing from me the last week.
I was going to say the same thing for you. You show up twice for this. I got to worry about it, man.
Yeah, so I heard this this seminar last week, and as a young farmer, probably the youngest in the room, I can't get this off my mind. I'm just looking towards the future, and kind of asked you last week. We couldn't come up with an idea, but here's an idea I had. If you can't rebuild the coalition with SNAP, is there another coalition out there? Maybe in terms of conservation, that seems to be a pretty good point of like maybe green renewable energy projects. Farmers hate windmills and solar and all that good stuff, but is there a coalition that we could come to help our budget in that way?
And hopefully it's not worse than the last time. I've changed it up a bit. So it's not a complete recycle, but thank you for suffering through it twice. And I will tell you that I've cursed your name a few times because our conversation afterwards has haunted me as well about the challenges you've talked about and what that looks like. And I still don't know. I failed to do my homework for you and come up with an answer since we last talked. But I do think that your perspective and perspective of other farmers like you are really key. Something that drives me crazy on the energy side is, this just fascinates me. And you're seeing this happen. So solar panels is a great example. There is nothing that requires us to put solar panels on farm fields. But why is that the first place when you sit in a corporate office and say, where could I put a solar panel today? Oh, there's empty, wasted space out there. What in the world is wrong with that thinking? And how do we design solar power policy that is not favoring farm fields over, I don't know, parking lots? Like, there are other places to put these things. I think the same thing about the next threat. And if you love solar panels, wait till you meet this thing called data centers. Holy crap. On what planet does it make any sense? I mean, at least a solar panel you can remove and farm again in the future. They put one of these data centers in, man, you've ruined a field forever. You also suck up giant amounts of water and electricity for what? So we can have an AI chatbot tell us which shoes to buy? What are we doing here? So this is the kind of policy situation that drives me absolutely bonkers. And trust me, when I say this to myself in the head, there's a lot of four-letter words, so I cleaned it up for you. But these data centers, this idea, I mean, where's this money gone between the field and the fork? I don't know, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars on data centers. What? Where is that money coming from? So these are challenges, and I hear you. And I want to work with you. I want ideas, man. Any ideas you have, let's think it through. But I don't know what that looks like. It's a huge challenge, and I appreciate you sticking it out second time.
Jonathan, top shoe brands to consider for quality and comfort include Nike
God.
and Adidas. New Balance or Brooks for support. All right, back here.
That was just mean.
So I'm sitting here after everybody in Illinois is well aware of all this Farm Bureau hubbub. And I'm sitting here thinking we've watched AFBF run over Illinois and take everything to the south in Farm Bureau. And it looks to me like we did exactly the same thing happen with farm policy. Were we just being too nice? Were we not paying attention? Or can we not find any leadership in the northern part of the country that can stand up to the southern leadership and get our fair share?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons and a lot of challenges, right? I mean, just take, for example, how many of you sit on the National Cotton Council? How many soybean farmers from cotton areas sit on the American Soybean Association board? Okay, so the situation is different, right? We know this from the Madisonian stuff. Those smaller kind of cohesive groups have an advantage in the system, and the budget policy makes it easier, but some of it comes down to representation and getting through to those individuals. So I'm not here to pick fights amongst the groups with the national groups and leaders. I hear your frustration, but there are challenges that I also appreciate. That they look, corn is a 100 million acre crop all across the country. Rice is a couple million acres in Arkansas, right? So there's challenges politically in that. And how you overcome that, I don't know. The regional coalitional concepts may be a part of it, but I'm not here, I don't want to leave you with the impression I'm saying you don't have leadership or people. I'm not trying to make everybody super mad at me. But I do think the challenges that you have, that we have in the Midwest, are different. The amount of acres and the crop situation is different. And so thinking about policy and politics in a different manner is probably important. Not just going along with some of the demands from our neighbors in the South. They have a different focus. So that's part of it. I don't know that I did not, in my most cynical moments, I thought we'd see something like this out of reconciliation, but this is worse than I expected. And it happened really fast. But standing up now, working on it now, pushing now, particularly trying to get something in this ad hoc discussion so that we're not just talking about ad hoc payments and bridge on bridges on bridges, that something goes along with that. And so you may not stop ad hoc payments, but can you get conditions attached to it that make sense here? And thinking that through. But I understand your frustration. And I don't want to excuse us in the Midwest. Maybe we're too nice. But I think the political realities are different. And that's part of the thing we have to think about. You don't get policy without politics, right? And so thinking about the politics and the strategy of politics is important, even if it may seem unseemly at times. And we sit at a different state of disadvantage than some of them do. So I'll leave it at that, but I understand the frustration, and I hear you. I worked in DC. I remember these conversations. I remember walking in a room defending a whole vast list of things, and they have one demand. It's a different negotiating situation. Sorry.
Steve.
Oh, you're gonna, uh-oh.
Jonathan, thank you for writing your book. It was a great read on just the historical perspective of how we got to where we are today. I've lived through many of these farm bills. I'm not that old, but I've lived through them. And I look at a lot of times the farm bills are written, they're written on what we should have done in the past and fixed the things to today. In 2018, looking forward, we could have never seen the things that happened. The tariffs, COVID, massive inflation, devalue of the dollar, all the reasons for ad hoc disaster assistance. If I go back through my career, when we first started, when I was a young kid, we had supply management, base acres set aside, trying to control the amount of production. We graduated from that to what I should have said is supply management with grain reserves, trying to pull stuff off the market to keep prices. The next graduation was freedom to farm, let everything go, let us figure it out. We couldn't stand on that, but then in another 10 years, we got the RFS, which was not farm policy, but it was farm policy.
Right.
It saved us for the next 10 years. And then now we're in this ad hoc disaster climate or type. We're at a time where we need to make a change again. And I think some of the ideas that you've got may take us forward, but we're kind of in an evolution time where it's time for change. I'm just not sure how we go forward.
No, I agree with you. I think the thing you do, we try to draw lessons from those, right? Just like with the acreage and conservation question, the RFS. What is successful about the RFS is also what is problematic about it, right? It's a demand driver, but we've also seen it spread acres, and particularly of corn. And so how do we think these things through? I don't know. And you're never going to design policy that's going to work perfectly for the future. You got other backstops, but building in flexibility is important. I think one of the problems, right, this sort of stuck in place system, like base acres, like reference prices, those I see are sort of markers of policy that is inflexible and doesn't change. So those are things we could think about replacing or changing in other ways. Again, the base acres, as you point out, base acres, the whole point of that was to fix other problems, which was when the payment was tied to the planted acre, it gave an incentive to plant even when the market was going the other direction. And for soybeans, it opened up a lot of acres for soybeans in this country. Again, that was 30-some years ago. So part of our problem, part of the reason why we always argue that we've done these farm bills every 5 years or so, was to revisit it. And what we've actually gotten into is a situation of how do I just get more of what I got from the last time, and we're not doing that. And so, again, as difficult as life may be without the coalition as it's been for 50 years, it's also an opportunity. And here I don't want to risk sounding like an optimist, but it does possibly open the door for innovative policies because you don't have the same coalitional vehicle to be a part of. So it may not be completely bad. But again, I don't want to risk sounding optimistic about anything today. I was instructed to be pessimistic. I'm kidding. That's KJ's fault, in case you wanted to know.
Jonathan, Ron
Yeah.
Kindred here.
Sure.
My question's on the crop insurance. As you look at the crop insurance, and we've upped the subsidy level to 80% on the supplemental coverage option, it looks to me like we're trying to provide too much risk protection for each individual farm, and that we run the risk of decreasing the subsidy on crop insurance as a whole to where it's going to be more unaffordable for us to buy. And it just seems like we're going down a rabbit hole with this, that it's not going to be actuarially sound as it has been in the past. And what are we going to eventually not have that as an option for risk management?
Ron, it's a great question and a difficult one to predict, but I do think the concern, I share the same concerns, obviously. I think the SCO policy, for whatever merits it may have, was a wrong direction, right? I think that one has to be rethought drastically, not just the 80% subsidy and 90% trigger point, or a guarantee point now. I don't know that a supplemental coverage option is the right form of risk management, but at the very least it needs to be rated properly and probably should be rated to stand on its own. If you're going to have an area-wide top-up policy, then maybe that rating system should be 1.0 everywhere it's sold. That's an idea, because those challenges are going to be hard. It's going to be difficult to just make little tinkering changes with that, because it is designed to provide more insurance in higher risk areas. And that was even before it went to 80 and 90. Now it is just kind of over the top for a high risk county. And again, it's encouraging, I think it'll encourage buy down, and so you're going to trade the individual level coverage for county coverage. And I don't know that that's necessarily the best risk management strategy. It may be the best strategy dollar-wise, particularly in a high-risk county, but it doesn't necessarily make it the best risk management strategy. So in the realm of things that really need to be rethought, SCO is a big one, I think. And the ratings of that seem to be, based on our analysis thus far, the ratings for that seem to be way out of whack. And I just add, the integrity question is big, right? Because it's an insurance program, so it is not the same as a subsidy program like ARC and PLC. So getting out of whack has consequences much bigger and more broad-based than simply overpaying on base acres.
This is a follow-on.
Oh.
It's a follow-on question, because the decision we have to make very soon is ARC or PLC. And we've been doing ARC at 85% successfully, but we Farm Credit had a good evening seminar on crop insurance, and when it was all said and done, I asked them flat out, do I do ARC or do I PLC at what percentage? And he said, well, what were? I said ARC at 85%. And he said,
Does that work before? Yeah.
Yeah. The second is a comment based on the SNAP. Very, very good explanation. And yet, this past year, school districts, and of course it's tied in with the USDA, is the milk producers, the dairy folks, have had the best year for whole milk they've ever had.
Yeah.
And the profits are, it's the greatest year that without SNAP.
Well, SNAP is still there, and the school lunch program is still there. SNAP is not going away. It's still there. It's just been cut.
It's still there, but,
yeah.
So I was just, they've got a commodity that the government is backing for all the school districts, for the school children, is whole, milk and all the dairy products.
Yeah. Yeah, I do want to take a moment off of that to give a shameful plug on we're rolling out an updated calculator for both crop insurance and for the ARC PLC, so you can run the estimate for 2026 crop year decision, which the ARC PLC decision is delayed. And to Ron's point with SCO, there's no longer, you can now take SCO with ARC County, whether that's a good idea or not, again. But soon we will have those released on the FarmDoc tools website, so you can run your own farm and get a sense of those payments. So thank you for that. And with that, I will say thank you again for sitting through that and suffering the dark cloud of my negative perception on the world. Hopefully it spurs thought and innovation and creativity amongst you all, And I look forward to having innovative and creative discussions with you on what policy should look like. So thank you, and take care.
Thanks, John. I used to name my fantasy football team Significant Nexus, but I think Maximum